Hello! In this video, we're going to talk about tying the ceremonial sageo knot. Now, if you're not familiar with what I mean by the ceremonial knot, if you didn't kind of catch it by the by the thumbnail, it is this gentleman over here. Now, if you're a gumdosa, this is how sageo is presented, and also they don't call it sageo because that's Japanese. However, if you're a gumdo practitioner, it's given to you sort of like this and sort of insinuated that it should stay like that. So for example, if you take a look at the jingum as well, as something very similar, right? So in Gumdo and potentially in Korean martial arts in general, you don't really use this for any functionality. It's mostly for ceremony. So for example, if you've seen some of the other jingum, for example, or even the earlier seigum, they used to have like a little bell or something like that hanging from it, as opposed to the sageo, that little cloth here. So why, one might ask, would we even tie it like this? Obviously it looks nice, especially if your sageo is two-tone like mine happens to be. And that's honestly sort of the main reason, right? So this is usually meant for ceremony, this is usually meant for like presenting the weapon. So this is mostly intended for, some people might even say storage, right? So as you're kind of like bringing it between places. However, I would actually disagree with that last part. There's a better knot that you can use to actually secure the blade a little bit better. So for my own biases, as you can probably tell from all of my videos, I do not keep the sageo like this. For a few reasons, right? So one reason is that it gets in the way when you're trying to draw the weapon when it's in your hip, as well as like these floofs can sometimes get in the way when you're trying to sheath the sword. Like again, it looks pretty, but it's not functional. Additionally, it doesn't provide as good of a movement. So if I'm trying to carry this sword from one place to another, if I don't have a properly sealed sword like mine is no longer, you can tell that it's going to pop out. So it's not really that good for transport. So this is mostly for prettiness and it's meant to be kind of, showcasing something you can put on your wall, etc. However, if you are a gumdosa and you currently have your sageo in a functional role, and you have, for example, a gumdo seminar, or you're going to meet, a high-ranking, Korean master, potentially you might want to switch your sageo back to this version. So I'm going to show you how to do that, right? So I'll show you how to get out of the functional knot. Not super hard, but then the more sort of tedious aspect of actually tying the ceremonial knot. But let's take a look. So let's talk about actually making that ceremonial knot, right? So I'm assuming if you're like me and there's like, oh no, there's a gumdo seminar coming up, I need to get out of the more functional knot and going back into the ceremonial knot. Not that I'm actually going to use this sword in particular at a Federation meet. However, I know that some people might want to use this for their kagum or their seigum or even their jingum, which is obviously not a bad idea. However, if we were going to be in front of gumdo masters, we want to make sure that we have their duds the way they like them. So we're going to talk about undoing the functional knot. Again, very, very simple. As well as actually tying the actual ceremonial knot, which is going to be kind of hard to do. I'm going to try to make do with what I can with this angle, but we're going to do what we can. So to tie the actual ceremonial knot, I recommend having a thicker pen, right? Like a Sharpie, for example. You can also make do with a pencil, right? But you want something that's round and long enough to go the length of the knot that you're going to be making, a little bit more than the length of it. Now, if you want to be a little more crude, right, and I'm all about kind of efficiency, you can also have a pair of pliers, or whatever these are called, to kind of help you pull the loops through. You'll see what I mean when we start talking about that. So let's take a look, right? So for now, I'm going to put these off to the side because I do not want them. I do not want them to scratch up or anything like that. So let's take a look, right? So as I said, the actual undoing of this knot is actually very simple. Again, so from here, all you're going to do, now if you have a really tight knot, then you can actually use pliers to actually help yourself through with that. However, I literally just tie this, so we should be able to pull it. So I'm going to be pulling on the very top here. So opposite the rest of the sageo, pull through. And what I'm actually going to do is make sure this is still taut, and then let go. So now we actually allegedly still have this in the midpoint. So that's going to be pretty crucial for us. So if you haven't, and you notice that your sageo was loose one way or the other, what you can do is again measure it up again, make sure that this is in fact the center of the sageo. So this is the point where things are going to get a little bit more fun cinematically, right? So what's actually kind of nice about having this two-tone, at least from a teaching perspective, is you'll be able to see like which way I'm twisting and stuff like that. So from here, all we're gonna do, so again, usually the bow actually is more along the top as opposed to the bottom. You can put on the bottom, but that's usually a little bit on the odd side. So all we're gonna do is take us from here. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna cross them. So bringing the right side to the left and left side to the right. So it's just going to cross on the very top this way. Now if you want to make sure it's pretty, you can make sure it's really, really flat as opposed to, you know, having it kind of bunch up a little bit. So from here, so noticing we have that happy little cross, make sure you also have your pen on hand relatively soon. All I'm going to do, so hopefully you can still see it, I'm going to put my thumb there just to make sure that X is going to stay secured. I'm going to move it over so hopefully you can see. I'm actually going to gather this up more behind. I'm going to keep this little gap here. So actually, if you want, I'm actually using my ring finger to keep it pressed there. I'm going to pull this behind. I'm going to push this portion through there, like so. Allegedly, like so. And from here I can actually gather up from behind to kind of tighten the knot a little bit. Now you do want the knot to be very tight. I'm going to say you want to keep this relatively loose for now, and you'll see why in a little bit. I'm just going to keep pulling on the back. I like to actually keep my thumb on this portion here as I feed this through. This is where we're going to have our fancy little pen or pencil. I'm going to feed this in through. I'm going to have it very, very gently holding in place. This is going to make a future step much, much easier and all that fun stuff. So from here, we're just going to do the same exact, I just tightened it. So we're going to do the same exact thing, right? So we're going to bring this part over. Right, so notice I still have that little gap. If you want to have, a finger holding that place in, I'm going to pull this back, and once again I'm going to push this portion up through it. Again, pulling on the back to really make sure it's tight against the sword. We don't care about tightening this portion up yet. Tight against the sword. You can kind of slip your pen through. And then once again, loosely tighten that portion. Again, the main portion that I want you to really be considerate of is tightening behind, so it's really tight against the sword itself, although we do want the loops to be generally loose. Now you're going to continue that all the way down. So what's kind of nice again with this two-tone is you notice it's going to stay the same. So I'm not twisting it. I'm going to keep the pattern that way. Again, I can hold this in if I want to, and keep going that way. Now, actually, what I'm going to do first, and this is something that I realized a little while ago, is you actually want to start this side, at least the first knot as well, so that it's a little more secured and you don't need to keep your thumb there. So we're going to do the same thing on this side. I forgot there's a button there. All we're going to do, again, make sure that's nice and tight. We have a little bit of slack here. We're going to pull the sageo on the left hand side up. We're going to pull that up through. Again, not unlike a slip knot because it is in fact a slip knot, right? So like so. I'm going to slip that pen in there. I'm going to tighten behind it to tighten the hold on the actual sword, and I'm going to gently pull that in. So now I don't need to keep my finger there. If you want to have like two and then keep adding one on each side, that's actually a pretty good way of doing it. It's kind of like how you put on tires, allegedly, although I've never done that myself. So once again, so making sure that you don't twist it, I'm going to bring it over. Again, feed it behind, like so. I'm going to feed it up, so again, just push that through, right? And then I'm going to feed that through here. And once again, pulling on the back of it. And holding, I like to hold down the little knot here as I finish that up. So allegedly, the main thing I want to not do is let that kind of go, or let the hold slacken. So at this point, all we're going to do is keep doing it until we have, so what you're going to do is you want to keep going until taking the very end, right? So this is the very end of the sageo. When you fold it in this way, so it's just like looped up, it's going to be the length of your future knot. Now you may not know what the future knot is yet the first time you do it, so I recommend make sure this is a little bit longer than you initially anticipate, although you don't want it too long because it's going to look very silly. So for me, because I've done this in the past and you've probably seen the thumbnail, I know there's going to be 4. Right? There's going to be 4 on each side for me. So we're just going to keep gathering it up like so, right? So I'm going to be working on my right hand side. Again, just twist. Again, not, well, pull it to one side, not necessarily twisting it. I'm going to feed this behind. I should probably actually put this here, so it's not going to do that. Pull up, feed that gentleman through, tighten, and pull. Now you will be able to tighten the knot later. So it's not ideal. You don't want it super, super loose. Let me just finish this while I'm just talking to the void. What you can do is you can tighten all of that later, and it's not going to be super detrimental to you. It'll be better for now, especially if this is your first time doing it, for you to have a looser knot than a tighter knot. So noticing that I'm at about 4 right now, and if I fold this over, yeah, that might actually be a little bit on the short side. But we'll find out. So ideally, it would be able to go through that way. So 4 seems to be pretty good. When I tighten it, it will get a little bit longer, so it's okay if it's a little bit on the short side. So let's just continue this on the other side. Assuming you're still there listening. So yeah, so there are also other variants of this knot that you can do. There's one that doesn't really have too much of the double bow. I want to make sure that's a little more pretty. So instead of this going both ways, there are versions you can actually have just going one way. So there's a lot of different ways you can tie your sageo. However, if you know me or have trained with me or have talked to me, you know that I am much more about pragmatism than I am about mere prettiness. Now that said, this can be a form of art, can be a form of meditation, etc. However, these are just things for you to consider. So notice we seem to be, so you might be thinking, well, the hard part's out of the way, right? Now all we need to do is just finish the bow. This is actually the more annoying portion, and this is the point where I would actually bring in my pliers if you so wish, right? So what we're gonna do is I'm gonna make the future knot here, right? Kind of figuring out like where I would want the end of my bow to be. Now, once again, you can change this in the future. Nothing is really super set in, I shouldn't say nothing. Few things are really set in stone at this point. It's really only when you're going to be tightening and stuff like that. So when I pinch it, this seems to look about right to me, right? So what I'm going to do is going to keep that. And we're going to start to feed this in. So what I'm going to do, so this is where things can go wrong and you can be very frustrated very quickly, so be super careful. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to loosen the very first knot, so the one that's on the same side. I am going to very gently pull the pen, the pen, only through this one loop. Do not pull all the way through. You will have to do some very, very quick dexterity to save yourself if you do that. So only pulling that through one. And in fact, what I'm going to do is push it through so it definitely doesn't accidentally unwind. For this reason, right? So at this point, if I were to pull down, that would come undone. That's sort of the point, right? So this is meant to be a slip knot. However, when you're tying a slip knot, you don't want it to unknot itself. So from here, I'm going to feed this through, ideally all the way, so using up all of the string that you have. And at this point, if you want to, you can kind of give yourself a little bit of tightening because that was particularly loose on this end. So you're just going to keep pulling and kind of playing with that. Okay, so hopefully that's making sense so far. And now you're going to be pulling that through the rest of the knots. Now this can be very frustrating, especially if this is tight, which is why I recommend using a Wacom pen apparently, or again something thicker like a Sharpie pen. But yeah, so from here, I'm going to very gently undo that single one. I'm going to try to also let you see it, so it's going to be fun. And then immediately push it through so it doesn't come undone. Keeping this knot, again, if you want to, you can kind of pull it up a little bit. Now, if you feel like it's too tight, right, you can't just like feed it through manually. At this point, I would actually keep it. Use this. Make sure you don't like snag on any of the fibers or anything like that. It almost certainly will happen if you do this for the first time. From here, I mean, you know how to use pliers. I like to get a good chunk of it, right? And then feed that through, right? Now, if you are a traditionalist, so actually at this point, before I talk about traditionalism, make sure there are no twists in this as you pull through. You want that all to be a nice, beautiful, straight line. And you're going to be doing this for all of them, so I can continue my rant as I finish this, right? So again, pull through just that one, pull that back through so it doesn't accidentally come undone. Use your pliers, grab, and pull through. So I'm trying to do this where it's also both cinematic and all that fun stuff. At this point, notice that it is twisting. So I'm just going to kind of like twist it so it's straight on the left-hand side. So then when I pull it through, it kind of undoes its shenanigans. Right, so now it's still straight. Now a traditionalist is probably not going to be super vibing with the fact I'm using pliers, probably because there's some, some rule against that somewhere. However, this is how I get things done. So again, making sure everything is straight, like so. And we're just going to do this for the rest of them, right? So we're going to undo just the one. Pull that back through. Don't forget to do that because you'll be very, very sad very, very quickly. So we try to minimize sadness if it's not deserved. And pull that through. I'm going to do this first. So as a sneak preview, while you're watching me almost like knit, we're going to be doing this the same way with the other one. Right now, obviously, that's really where I would recommend really having the pliers. Again, make sure it's straight. Because you're going to be feeding it behind or in front of, really up to you, the loop that's already there. Right, so we're kind of pulling this through, making sure the orientation is nice. And with our final one, notice that I discarded my pen. You can pull this through. So at this point, you can tighten it a little bit if you want to. Right, again, because you do want tight against the sword, not loose. At this point, I'm going to keep that. I'm going to keep the knot at the very end a little bit on the looser side. But now we're going to have to do this again. So noticing I'm going to, again, measure this out. Like, this seems to be about right to me. I'm going to keep this as my knot. And now I'm going to feed it behind. Now, if you want to be fancy, because everyone loves a little bit of fanciness, if you do have a two-tone, if you know this is a brown one, you can try to make this a blue one if you really want that. All you're going to do is like do a little extra twisty bit, right? Just for that extra flex, right? So that way you have a brown one, you have a blue one. Isn't that fun? So now if it is super loose, what you can do, I'm trying to do it on this side, you can just feed it right behind. And if it is super, super loose, then you probably don't need to worry too much, right? You just have to feed it. At this point, I'm also going to show you how to start to tighten things up as you go. So at this point, I don't need to push anything else through that same loop, so we can really start to tighten the loop itself. So I'm going to pull on the back to tighten it against the sword, and then I'm going to feed it. So I'm going to pull so not the floofly floof portion, but the thing at the bottom, and pull that down to actually start to tighten that knot. Now this can take a few tries, right? And once that knot is tighter, then I can pull on the actual loop itself again, not the one that's attached to the tail, but the other one. So it's going to be the one that's on front. That's not the front. It's going to be one in the back, and tighten that gentleman up. So at this point, we're just going to do the same thing, right? So this is where I would highly recommend using those pliers, even if you are a traditionalist. If you're a traditionalist, you're probably not watching me do it anyway, so there's that. So at this point, I'm just going to pull this behind the other one. So again, pliers make this a little bit easier. I'm going to reach in, open up, feed enough of it through, pull through, and at this point make sure again everything is straight. You do still have that issue, so notice everything is straight this way. Just going to pull that through, and if you want, you can also make sure these are also nice and pretty and not bunched up. So you can also kind of pull them closer together so they're really, next to each other like buds. I'm just going to do that for the rest of them. Again, nice and pull through. Now, allegedly, there are people who do this for fun. Allegedly, out there's fun to be had by doing this. So again, notice that I bunched up a little bit, kind of smoothed it out, and again, feed things through this way. Now, if you do have a this is going to make it sound like I'm a pompous jerk. If you have a more standard sageo, so something that's more like kind of knows what's on my jingum, right? So that's kind of like unused what's called tsukuito, right? So the wrapping, right? So this is clearly like meant to be worn like a sageo. It's not really meant to be like, oh, this came undone, let me use this, which is sort of the vibe that you get from especially the Federation swords, which is usually what happens, by the way. So it's not just the Federation doing Federation-y things. So if you do have those, be careful on how you use your pliers, because you might actually damage the sageo, right? So you do want to make sure you do that. So noticing like here, there's a little bit of frame because in the past I was very aggressive with these and I didn't give myself enough space to kind of squeeze through. Now this may not look super pretty once you kind of finish this up just yet. Noticing we have just one more. See what happens when we just talk all the way through things? And then you push this through, and then you are good. So at this point, nothing is at risk of coming undone naturally, right? So you can here just be like, I'll save the tightening for another day. However, because you're here, right? Now this is perfectly fine, sort of. It's not even, but that's a whole other thing. However, if this is like you just want to have this done, you can stop here. But you can also start to tighten the actual knot a little bit more, make it a little bit look a little bit nicer, etc. So what you're going to do that, I'm going to be starting inside out. I'm going to start with behind the very first knot and just pull that up. Notice it does come loose a little bit, right? So that's a little bit tighter. I'm going to pull this portion to tighten that up, right? Again, trying to make sure everything is nice and pretty. And we're just going to keep going that way, right? So then pull the next one up. Allegedly, this portion should also tighten. Again, I'm actually doing this kind of motion on the actual band here to get that a little bit tighter. And once again, pulling the next portion. Again, making sure that that twist is very nice. Again, getting my fingers behind the next one, using my little twisties. Get a little bit more. Yeah, that one was loose. A little bit more, right? And once again, pulling this through. You can use pliers, although I feel like that's a little bit aggressive here. And once again, getting behind it, tightening that up, pulling that through. And this is the very last one. This is the one that's going to go into your knot proper, right? So from here, again, being careful, you're going to pull on the correct side so that actually, slips that in. And notice that this does get a little bit longer. So the reason why this is not even is because this side is still very, very loose. So you're going to do the same thing, right? So on this side, again, pulling up behind, these two are really close to each other, so it's hard to see. Pulling up behind, right? So get that nice traction, so get nice and close to the action, nice and secure. I like to keep my finger on the very back so it doesn't kind of unwind. I'm going to pull the next section over, right? Gotta make that look nice and pretty. And once again, getting behind the next one, doing this guy with the next row. Noticing that this portion also tightens as you do that. And once again, feeding that through to the next one. Really hoping that this is showing up on the camera because this is a lot. So then we do the very next one. Just love the future video might just be me, just my hands because you won't even see what I'm doing. Tighten. Next portion. I say next portion. Right. You gotta make sure that loop is nice and pretty. Pull the next one back. Yeah, that's a lot. Here, right? And then, where you be, man? I think it's this guy. Isn't the guy, where you be? That's you, I think. Maybe. So then you just pull on the correct side. Yeah, that was you. Hopefully my my head's not on the camera. Yeah, there we go. Pull that guy so it's nice and tight. Pull this guy so it actually like good. And at this point, now that everything is tightened, you just want to make sure everything is even. Right, so you want the bow to be the same length as the tail. It's slightly uneven for whatever reason. Maybe not. Yeah, it actually is relatively even. So yeah, so then you kind of just like mush things around so it's more upright, kind of like show off that bowness, right? And suddenly you have at least now you have a tighter ceremonial knot. So hopefully that makes sense, and hopefully you're actually able to understand what was going on as I was doing it. And there we have it, right? So that's how you tie the ceremonial knot. So hopefully everything came out. So my future self will be like, yes, camera did it. So that's how you do the ceremonial knot. Again, it's not necessarily a functional knot per se, but again, it looks very nice. It is the way the Federation does it. And even if you aren't part of the Federation, it's still a good kind of skill to know. And to kind of add a little bit of the oogie boogie, because that's just what I do. I like to add other aspects to it, to kind of add the, so it's not just the meditation aspect. You can obviously like do knots and stuff like that as a form of meditation. Another way you can think of this is you can try to, again, a little bit oogie boogie, try to imbue intentionality as you tie it, right? So for example, if you're very, very frustrated and you're just like very angry as you're like crafting something, because this is a form of crafting, that vibe might actually kind of like rub off on the object that you're working on, right? So like as you're tying this, try to have good vibes, right? So like have, again, like, oh, like, try and have that focus. So like when you feel that knot, like either at your side or when you see it across a room or something like that, you remember that intentionality as you crafted that knot. So a little bit of the oogie boogie, but something that I highly recommend. It gives you a little more focus on what you do. So hopefully that makes sense. But as usual, make sure you stay safe, stay humble, and keep training. Haidong, or just hello. This may not be a Gumdo video, but have a good one.